Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our weekly course breakdown. This time we've got ourselves the Valero Texas Open TPC San Antonio, which is your quintessential Texas-style golf course. So we'll be breaking down what to expect from this venue, as well as some of the comp courses, key stats that I'm using to go out there and identify some of my top plays. So by the end, you should be somewhat of an expert of all things Valero Texas Open and be ready to hop into all of your research for this week. And we've got ourselves a little bit of an appetizer here before the main course there for the Masters next week. So obviously a spot up for grabs for the winner out here. So if you're not already qualified and you get the dub this week, you'll be heading over to Augusta. But also we'll be thinking about some of the players that might be tuning themselves up for the year's first major to come. So obviously excited for that event, but we've got the Valero Texas Open to worry about here first. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. TPC San Antonio, a Greg Norman design in 2010, is a par 72 at just 7,438 yards, which is right about tour average in terms of its length. It's got a few holes, like some of the longer par 5s, where you've got to have some distance to take advantage into. Some of the longer holes are some of the par 3s. The par 4s, though, nothing really of note, right? You don't have those 500 plus yard par 4s to worry about all that often. So a course where really you've got to worry about just a Texas kind of style of golf where you've got firm and fast conditions, you have winds that can kick up from time to time, and the greens around TPC San Antonio tend to have some tricky, subtle little breaks to them. So it's not nearly the birdie fest that a par 72 at just 7,400 yards could be. You could see scoring averages of 1.5 under par, but last year was just 0.24 shots under. So not nearly like I said, the birdie fest that some might expect at this track at a 71.76 average. In terms of your ball striking metrics, your driving accuracy was just 59.2%, and your GIR average was just 63.8%. The driving accuracy nearly 7% lower than your tour average, and your GIR percentage was a little bit over 4% lower than your tour average. So both of those were slightly harder to come by, and that was with, I would see, average conditions last year. Last year, there were some, rainstorms a couple weeks before the event. There was no sort of drought going on that was limiting their irrigation levels, and the greens, I don't want to say that they were dartboards, but they were at least of like average receptiveness. This year, the area is going through a severe drought. The last 2 months, they've gone less than an inch of rain. And in fact, the course is running at 65% capacity when it comes to the irrigation levels. So this year should be significantly firmer and faster than really a firm and fast golf course to begin with. So that 59.2% fairway percentage is likely to go down, and that green regulation percentage at 63.8% is also likely to be a little bit lower this year, especially if we throw in a little bit of that Texas wind. Now, getting back to some of the specifics, the greens are 6,400 square foot, so they're about your tour average in terms of your size. So a lot of the reason why the GIR average is slightly lower than what you're used to seeing is because of how firm the greens are. So that would only be furthermore the fact this year if that trend continues. Looking at the fairways, they're about 25 to 30 yards wide. So they're actually about average in terms of their size, if not slightly larger than your PGA Tour average fairways. But once again, the reason why they're hard to hit is because they're pretty much like concrete. They bounce like a trampoline. And if you don't have the ball going directly down the center of the fairway, you're likely going to bound into some of that rough, which is 2.25 inches long. That is the primary rough out there. That is a perennial ryegrass. But you do also have patches of fescue, which is, of course, a lot longer than 2.25 inches and a whole lot more penal. So as long as you can avoid the fescue patches, stay in that primary set of rough that's about 2 inches long, you're not going to have any sort of issues out there. In terms of your green types, they are a POA Trivalous Overseed, so very similar to what you've seen for, I'd say, most of the golf tournaments over the last 2 months. You had them at PGA West for the Amex, you had them at TPC Scottsdale for the Waste Management Phoenix Open, TPC Sawgrass for the Players. You had them at Valspar with the Copperhead course. You had them last week at the Match Play over there at Austin Country Club. So a lot of places that we can pull some metrics from, try and get an idea for some comps. The one thing I'd warn about is that the GCSAA also let us know that because of the drought, some of the Bermuda grass is starting to bud through. So typically that doesn't happen till later in the summer, when conditions get a little bit hotter and a little bit drier, is when you tend to see the Bermuda take over as the dominant surface type. It's not going to be the dominant surface. That's still going to be that Poa tribolus overseed, but perhaps a little bit different than from some of the other events that we've had is you might see some of that Bermuda grass grain come through. So it's hard to really, tell you how that's going to affect the golf course, if at all, out there, but just want to throw it out there because they did put that on the report for the golf course this week. The greens should be running at about 11 on the stimp meter. That's also what they told us over there on their sheet. Usually they tend to run a little bit quicker than that. So throughout the week, because it's going to be so dry, don't be surprised if they get a little bit closer to 11.5 or even maybe a 12 by the end of the week there as well. Now let's take a little hole-by-hole peek around TPC San Antonio to get an idea of what these players will be facing. So starting with hole number 1, it is 461. Not really the handshake that you'd hope for at most PGA Tour tracks, but still, these fairways tend to run. So if you hit a 3-wood out there, you're easily going to get it out here to 292. A driver probably puts you up a solid 30, 40 yards. You're going to get a lot of rollout here. So you can see I have it at 330 yards there. That's probably your above average drive. I'd say your average drive, probably be a little bit more conservative about it, set it back 5 to 10 yards at probably like 320, but that's leaving you about 140 yards in. So it looks a little bit more gnarly than it is. A lot of the scorecard yardage here is a little bit deceiving. There are holes that go into the wind that will play to their true distance, but anything in neutral winds, side winds, that sort of thing aren't really as gnarly as the scorecard yardage would indicate to you. Hole number 2 is your first par 5. It's relatively straightforward. You want to avoid these bunkers off the tee. They're certainly in play with how firm and fast the conditions typically are here. But if you miss them out to the right, avoid some of the trees over there. You can have a look at 2 here. It'll be about 270, maybe 280 yards to the center of the green. 250 to the front is easily gettable by the entire field. If you're looking at a back middle pin, and this is a double green here, you're not seeing things there. There is a second green to the backside, which in fact, that's actually a par 3. So there's a little bit of cross action that could happen if players end up hitting a shank on that par 3. But pretty much everyone can at least get it up towards the green here in 2, which sets up a birdie look for a majority of the field. You're going to need them because you're going to get punched in the face relatively fast. Your first punch in the face is hole number 3, 210 yards. All of it is carry over water. And essentially where this, fake pin in the middle is, first off, will not be a pin location. I can guarantee you that. Will be the target for pretty much every player, no matter what the pin location is. This is the definition of, try and get that on there in 1 and then 2 putt for a par. It is as difficult as it gets. Hole number 4 is 487. It's one of the longer par 4s on property. It's also one of the larger greens though. So it's definitely a 2 putt in par and get out of there kind of hole. But you gotta keep it in play off the tee, and then you gotta hit a long iron to a relatively large green. But if you miss 5-10 yards left, you could be in the woods. If you miss to the right, this chip up the hill isn't all that simple. So it's definitely an execution hole, one where you got to hit a good drive and a solid long iron approach. Hole 5 is 397. It's on the shorter end of the spectrum. Another one where you could actually get it into a little flip wedge range, right? Some of the longer hitters are probably getting it at least 330 yards. This 316 number is probably your average drive for the field. And doing so gets you to right around 80 yards. And that's to a center pin location, right? A back pin's probably like 90 yards from this spot. A front pin probably closer to like 65, probably like 70 yards to one of these front pin locations. And if you're a little bit more aggressive or a little bit longer off the tee, your Cam Champs of the world, your Terrell Haddons of the world might be looking. I mean, let's move the pin to the front up here, right? Little like 50-yard little pitch shot. So it's definitely a birdie look, especially if you're one of those longer players. Hole 6 is 405, another shorter par 4. These shorter par 4s are really where you have to make your hay. The par 5s are all relatively long, so unless you're a bomber, they're pretty much like these short par 4s, right? Where you're going to have a wedge into a pretty good birdie look. So whoever can be the best wedge player, you've seen them have a lot of success here. Guys like Zach Johnson have gone back-to-back around this golf course, which, for a 7,400-yard golf course might not really seem like the golf course fit you're looking for, but distance is helpful for sure. But that wedge play is kind of like the great equalizer, right? That's how you take advantage of those par 5s when you're not all that long. And then all those easy par 4s, that's how you take advantage of those. Hole 7 is 207. It's that other half of the double green that I was mentioning before, and it's a long par 3. They like to play pin locations to the left side over here, but not really at the front. And then this back right pin is probably the hardest, which might not seem like it was because it's like farther away from the bunker, but the shot over the green is impossible to like a middle back pin, that sort of thing. So it's part of that double green, which is kind of funky, and it's a difficult par 3, like all of the par 3s around this track. Hole 8 is 613, another long par 5. Some of the elite tier bombers, let's put them at 335. That's 330 right there. That leaves you about 280 to the center of the green, probably like 265, 270 to the front of the surface. It's well bunkered, so you're going to have a hard time trying to bounce anything onto this green. But some of the bombers will be able to get it up greenside probably into one of these sand traps, and maybe get up and down for a birdie. The more conventional approach, of course, is going to be to probably lay up to like 100 yards where they actually already have the marker back here, which is definitely gives you another way to make a birdie. It's just, kind of depends on your distance off the tee there. Hole 9 is 478, another longer par 4. It's a difficult hole when it's playing into the wind, which I believe is the case most of the time on hole number 9, because this is typically one of the harder holes on property. Hole 10 is 456. So if you're starting on the back 9, I think it's easier than the front because this hole typically plays downwind. So you can hit drives of like 350 here with some of the firm and fast conditions, which will leave you a little flip wedge in. So it's of the two 9s, I think it's the easier one to start on. Hole 11's a short par 4. The tee shot's a little bit funky because you have this bunker here, which if you hit an iron off the tee comes into play. This is the 3-up landing area over here. If you hit driver, you bring these bunkers into play, and then there's a hill right here. You can kind of see it from the overhead view, but it's a really steep hill in between this little flat area then the green. So most people just hit a driving iron 3-wood off the tee, and then you got to squeeze it between all those bunkers, which is the difficult part of 11. But if you execute that, you've got a wedge into a short hole. Hole 12 is another short par 4, a hole that you have to take advantage of. Another example where those wedge players tend to find a lot of success here. Hole 13 is 246. It's another one of the harder holes, one of these hard par 3s out there. No matter whether they have water or whether they're just the longer holes on property, these par 3s are ridiculously difficult. Hole 14 is 574. This is the shortest par 5 on property. A tee shot that tends to roll out a ton too. And the longer you are, the more that you can cut off this corner. So they have this at 288. You're going to have players. Let's just show you this, right? It's a 330 carry to take it the whole way down that far. Maybe a little bit more responsible would be back here. This is a 300-yard carry, right? So every player in the field, especially if this is playing downwind like it is a majority of the time, can carry it over this line. And let's say that would leave you like right here in the fairway. That leaves you 230 into this green, which is easily reachable by the entire field. The longer players can be a little bit more aggressive, probably taking an extra like 30, 40 yards up. That leaves them about 200 yards in. So this, especially if it plays in the direction of downwind, is a really easy par 5. Hole 15 is 469. It's about your average hole around here. It's a driver, mid-iron, pretty typical. Hole 16 is the easiest of all the par 3s, I would say, but still wacky in its own right with a bunker in the center of the green. So its version of the donut hole that you see over there at Riviera, it's got a ton of undulation to it. So it's the easiest from the ball striking perspective, but really wacky with some of the humps and hollows on it. Hole 17's 355, drivable by some of the longer hitters with an advantageous wind. A birdie look for everyone, though, regardless of your strategy there. Some of those elite tier wedge players will just put themselves to 90 yards and hit it close. And then on hole 18, you have your last par 5, an infamous par 5. You have the hotel in the background. Most of the pictures of this golf course come from this finishing hole here. It is reachable in 2. You have to be one of the longer players off the tee because you've got to put it 320, probably 330 out there to have a chance. You can see at 320 right there, that leaves you 280 into the center of the green, but you have this creek running up the right. So unless you have to go for it, most players are going to lay up over here to the right, which would leave you about 80 yards into the green. Also, the further right that you lay up, the better angle you have into most pin locations there on the green complex. If you go for it though, right, you've got to hit the hero shot, right? You've got to run it up here, probably a little bit short of the green. Hope you get a good bounce and stay out of that creek. So it's a really fun finishing hole, and like I said, you have the resort over here to the left and a huge build out around it, which it doesn't truly have that stadium-like atmosphere, but it's solid for a finishing hole on tour. Now that we've seen the golf course, let's go ahead and talk about our key metrics for success that I'll be using to identify some of my top plays of the week. So at number 1, we've got shots gained approach. No surprise there, but perhaps what's worth noting for this week is the emphasis on the wedge play, so that 50 to 125 yard range, that 125 to 150 yard range, slightly more utilized this week than at most tour courses, but also the extremely long iron range, that 250 yard plus yard range is used a lot more at this kind of golf course than most, whether it's off the tee for tee shots, but more importantly, those long shots into those par 5s. The players that have had success on the par 5s are usually the players that are winning this golf tournament. In fact, you look at the last 3 champions at the Valero, they have been number 1 in the field in the par 5 scoring. So shots gained approach, if you're going to look at anything, look at the wedges, maybe look at some of those 250 yard plus yard approach shots. But outside of that, number 2, we're looking at driving accuracy and also good drive percentage. Not a surprise given some of the layups around here. You want players that not only are going to lay up, but lay up well, right? How much of the time when they miss are they still able to hit greens? I'm also looking at distance from center of fairway. That's a way to look at, who's the most accurate when you're hitting fairways. And overall, this is a golf course where driving distance isn't really all that important, right? In fact, if you look at some of the correlations over the last 2-3 years, it's been negatively correlated to success, whereas driving accuracy slightly more important at this course than most. So it's not like driving distance is in the gutter and then you have driving accuracy up on a pedestal, but it's still worth noting that I'm focusing a little bit more on the accuracy side this week than on driving distance. And our key stat number 3 is shots gained around the green, which might be a little bit surprising. I don't love putting it up here in my top 3, but there's no doubt that looking at last year's results, years before that, in fact, over the last 5 years, that it's been a huge factor, especially in some of the top end success. And if you go to this golf course, it accounts for about 20% of your shots gained. It typically accounts for closer to like 10 to 12%. It's usually by far the least important metric week to week on tour. At this golf course, it's still the least important out of the 4, but it's nearly twice as important as what it usually is on tour. And a lot of it comes down to how much you miss around this firm and fast golf course, but also how difficult the shots can be because it's shaved down fairway areas, elevated greens, and greens with a lot of undulation to them. So the players that can save par when they get into those kind of situations have found a lot of top end success. Outside of that, you're also looking for players that can putt on these hybrid surfaces. I did note before that I think they're going to play a little bit more grainy this time around because of the budding Bermuda grass, but definitely take a look at some of the other POA Trivalous overseeded courses. You can also consider par 5 scoring. I mentioned how important that was. You take a look at birdie or better percentage. A lot of the aggressive players have found success here because everyone's going to make bogeys. A lot of times it's about how many times you can post those birdies and score out there. That's how you take it low around this kind of track. And you can also, if you want to take a look at driving distance, I don't hate it, right? Those long par 5s, right? You can get home in 2 if you're one of the longer players. A lot of long iron approaches, right, on those 450 to 500 yard par 4s. I don't want to completely ignore driving distance. It's just that it's not in my top 3 or 4 key stats, right? It's up there like 6 or 7 on the metrics. It's definitely a ball striking course, right? We have all the ball striking metrics up there in the top 3. Really, it's a tee to green course more than anything. If there's anything that is de-emphasized around here, I would say it's the putting, right? Putting being at number 4 is a lot lower than what it typically is week to week. Driving distance, like I said, it was negatively correlated to success, probably a little bit less important at this golf course, but not non-existent, right? Guys that have that distance are still going to be able to utilize it this week, just like some of the best putters on the PGA Tour are still going to have that advantage going for them, right? It's just that at this kind of golf course, it makes a slightly, lesser impact than it would at other courses on the PGA Tour. And now for our comps. At number 1, we've got TPC Summerlin, which from the ball striking perspective is relatively similar to what you're going to get. It's the home of the Shriners Children's Open for anybody that needs to score at home there. But on top of that, you've got like a firm and fast course that's mostly about driving accuracy off the tee. Now, Summerlin's a little bit shorter than what you have this week at San Antonio, but because of some of those Texas rollouts, some of the Texas winds on some of the downwind holes, they play to about the same distance. So it's about wedge play there, taking advantage of some of the shorter par 4s. This course is a little bit more difficult because of those 450 to 500 yard par 4s. But it's all about the same kind of metrics, right? Around the green is important at both courses. The wedges, the long irons are important at Summerlin for some of the longer par 5s. They also have a few longer par 5s at both tracks. Any sort of correlation analysis that you look at, whether it's on Rick Run Good, you look at Data Golf, a lot of the big data sites that are doing correlation analysis with golf courses, all have TPC Summerlin as their number 1 correlated course. So that's what I'm looking at mostly this week. It fits the eye test, it fits the stat test, and even in my own correlation analysis also comes in at number 2. So it's up there, it's not number 1. Number 1, believe it or not, is the Innisbrook Resort Copperhead course, which is a little bit surprising. It's a Florida course, right? And we're comparing it to a Texas golf course, but it's another difficult track with the same Poa Trivialis kind of greens, and it emphasizes the same kind of iron play. There's a few shorter par 4s around Innisbrook where it's all about hitting those mid to shorter irons, and then some long holes, right? Where not only do you have to execute a solid drive, but also a 250 plus yard approach shot. So Innisbrook Resort on my analysis is at number 1. So I have it at number 2, right? The industry sentiment has always been behind TPC Summerlin. A lot of crossover champions between the two golf courses. There's also been a lot of crossover success between Innisbrook and then what you have here at TPC San Antonio. Charlie Hoffman champion at both golf courses. Adam Hadwin has had success at both. Corey Connors, when he plays at Valspar, tends to find success. There's just a lot of guys that you'll find up towards the top of the board at both courses, and it makes sense. Both very similar ball striking tests with the same types of greens. And at number 3, we've got TPC Scottsdale. So the home of the Waste Management Phoenix Open has the same Poa Trivialis overseed going on. Another course where it's a little bit more about the approach play than anything. Off the tee, you want to be accurate more than you want to be long around TPC Scottsdale. And on top of that, you have really tricky surfaces, right? When you miss around the green around TPC Scottsdale, you're going to pay for it. It's going to be extremely difficult to get up and down. It's the same kind of style of golf in a Texas style golf course, and especially here at TPC San Antonio. So I think you can look at all 3 of those tracks. If you want to take a look at TPC Sawgrass because it has the same kind of greens, I'm okay with it. PGA West, because of the green crossover, you can do it too. Pretty much anything that has this overseed situation. If you want to consider it just ever so slightly, particularly from the putting angle, I'm all for that sort of thing. But these 3 comps that we're focusing on right here, not only, especially with the last 2, check the green perspective, but also check the ball striking test that you're going to get here for this week. That is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Before you hop out of here, go ahead, comment down below what you think the winning score is going to be. It could be anything from, I'd say, like the high single digits under par to probably like 15, 16 under. But because of the forecast, which looks like your typical windy forecast for Texas this time of year, and the firm and fast conditions, I'm going to assume it's going to be a little bit more difficult, kind of like what we saw at the Valspar Championship. So I'm going to take 10 under par as my winning score for this year. But go ahead, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. That way you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll be doing our DFS content for Valero, getting ready for the Masters a little bit early too. So our course breakdown for Augusta will be dropping probably around like Friday at the very latest for that event. And then of course, all the content for the big week at the Masters. So looking forward to it, guys. You don't want to miss any of that content when it drops. So like I said, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. But until next time, best of luck with all those DFS lineups, any outright bets that you decide to go with, and let's get this cash, fellas.